The fourth thing we do, and this is the last on our series of 4 things we do before we teach sounds, is we work on the English articulatory setting. Now, this is not the same as an individual articulation. What we have, we clearly have human bodies which we can adapt to do all sorts of different physical things with. And the body has a different, we hold ourselves for doing different sports in different ways. If I'm fencing, I might hold myself like this, and then there'll be individual gestures from that starting position which will enable me to fence successfully. If I'm playing squash or doing any other sport, there's a starting position, and then there's a series of gestures of actual articulations which are the actions of that sport. And it's exactly the same in language. In languages, there are different gestures which create different sounds, but there are underlying settings for each language. And it's impossible to speak good English if you have the underlying setting for French, and vice versa. And it's best to get this being worked on right from the very start of a course, because why give people bad habits, which they're going to find difficult to unpick later on. So we work on the English articulatory setting from the very start of a course. Now, in order to work on this, this is why it's important to have done this earlier work at the start of the course, because they are going to have to be aware of where their alveolar ridge is, and the fact that the tongue has a tip, but it also has an area just a few millimeters back called the blade. And in most languages, sounds like T, D, N, and L are created because the blade of the tongue, sitting just here, comes in contact with the alveolar ridge. And that's going to change for English in a way that we're about to see. But it's important to have this vocabulary around in the class so people are aware that there's a distinction between the very tip of their tongue and the blade of their tongue, even though we're only talking about a few millimeters on the tongue surface. OK, I'm going to play a couple of short videos here which illustrate this idea of an articulatory setting. We've got a Chinese man who's only speaking for 5 or 6 seconds on the left, and then in fact he swallows after that. But he speaks for 5 or 6 seconds, and then we've got an American woman talking over there. And what I want you to pay attention to in each case is where the body of the tongue is, and what's the relationship between the tip of the tongue and the blade of the tongue and the alveolar ridge. So there's 2 things. Roughly, where is the tongue positioned? And what's happening between the tip and blade of the tongue and the alveolar ridge while they're speaking.
欢迎来到马普协会科学美术馆。
And now we'll play the American English speaker. This is a bit longer, but again, where's the body of the tongue gone? And what's happening between the tip of her tongue and her alveolar ridge?
When it comes to singing, I love to sing French art songs. It's probably my favorite type of song to sing. I'm a big fan of Debussy. I also love operas. I love singing Donizetti and Mozart and Strauss. But when I listen to music, I tend to listen to hard rock or classic rock music. And one of my favorite bands is AC/DC. And my favorite song is probably Back in Black, which I'll listen to over and over again in my room.
It's fascinating, isn't it, to see what a difference. It's absolutely extraordinary. The tongue in English, it's displaced backwards, and then the tip of the tongue is constantly rapping against the alveolar ridge, completely different from what's happening in Chinese or French or Japanese or most other languages of the world. Now, we could ask why this isn't better known within English pronunciation teaching. This was written about very beautifully by a woman called Beatrice Honigman in 1964, and you can download this article from the web, and I'd really highly recommend it. It's a beautiful description of the English articulatory setting compared to the French one. And if I could just plug, since this is a joint meeting of NATECLA and the IATEFL Pronsig, could I just plug the Pronunciation Special Interest Group journal, which is called Speak Out, which regularly has articles about the English articulatory setting and how to teach it successfully. The point that Beatrice Honigman made was, number one, there's light contact. When speaking English, there's light contact between the sides of the back of the tongue and the rear molars. And the tip of the tongue is pulled backwards compared to other languages, and it's the tip which is constantly rapping against the alveolar ridge in order to produce sounds like T, D, N, and L. So those are the 2 key characteristics of the tongue in the English articulatory setting.